Have you ever been at ground zero of like a natural disaster? Hurricane, tornado, earthquake, maybe a man-made disaster. I'm from Oklahoma City. This morning in Oklahoma City, there were 22,500 people that took 25 minutes roughly to cross the starting line of a race for the memorial. The memorial of what? Some of you are asking. The Oklahoma City bombing that happened April 19th, 25 years ago. I was sitting in Nashville, Tennessee early that morning, and my sister called me and she said, "Hey, I just want to let you know we're okay." I'm used to those phone calls, okay? Maybe you're not, but I am, because I grew up in Oklahoma. So what happens every year about this time of the year in Oklahoma? We have tornadoes. The last house I lived in as an adult in Oklahoma doesn't exist anymore. I wasn't living in it, thankfully, when the tornado took it away, but it's gone. We had moved from Moore several years before that, but one of the last major tornadoes that hit Moore, Oklahoma, completely destroyed that house along with hundreds of others. And so I'm kind of used to growing up with that natural disaster thing in the background. So when my sister called and said, "Hey, I just want to let you know we're okay," I was like, "Oh, did you guys have a bad tornado?" She said, you haven't heard?" And I said, "No, I've been driving to work and was probably listening to, a CD." That was back when we had CDs. Some Christian artist probably. And got to Nashville and got into my office and get this phone call. And she said, "No, there's something blew up downtown." And she knew as soon as I knew the address, I would be concerned, because her office was just a couple of blocks away. And she was in a corner office that had glass on two sides of it, on the ground floor. And so, and those windows were shattered. Thankfully, she was at home that day. But she knew I would be concerned. And so there are times in our life when we're either close to somebody that's kind of been ground zero, or we've experienced ground zero in a situation like that. But there's a lot of ground zeros in our lives that have nothing to do with natural disasters or terrorist attacks, unless you count Satan as a terrorist. I do, so I'm going to go there. We have attacks all the time. We are at ground zero on a regular basis if we are walking with Christ. Now, if we're not, maybe Satan's just leaving us alone. Maybe it's no big deal and he's fine with however things turn out in your life. But if you're trying to walk with Christ, you have a target on your back. A massive target on your back. And so ground zero is going to come looking for you periodically. And it's going to find you. And Jesus even tells us that. We're going to talk just a tiny bit out of the very first words that Jesus ever preached in a public sermon this morning. And that's just a tiny bit of what Jesus talks about there. But in that same sermon, he tells other stories, and he talks about houses that are built on a rock, or houses that are built on the sand, and different things along these lines. And he basically is saying, look guys, the storm's coming. You can't avoid the storm. You can't spiritualize your way out of it. You can't righteous your way out of it. You can't pray your way out of it. The storm is coming. It's how are you going to handle the storm, and what are you going to do before the storm gets there, hopefully, to set yourself up for less damage, maybe no damage even, but the storm's still coming. And then let's say the house is not built great, and I've not prepared well for the storm, and the storm comes, and then boom, the house is destroyed. Now what do I do? And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about this morning. And since Garrett asked me to do that, I thought it would be best if I invited the smartest person that I knew up to help me with that. And Steve's in the back, so it can't be him. But it is Sheila. And so, because most of the storms that I've weathered well or weathered badly and survived to overcome have been with Sheila at my side. And she's gotten to weather them with me. And some of her storms, unfortunately, have been because of me. So I'm going to ask her to come up so you can pray for her, because we've not done this a whole lot. We've done some marriage retreats before that we've led together. Immense warfare surrounded those. We, probably, threatened divorce 3 or 4 times before the marriage retreat. Last night on our way home from Raleigh, after having spent only 40, maybe 30 hours with our 2 youngest grandsons, I think we were almost ready to, run each other off the road last night. So, and we were talking about this. So, when you go after deep, intimate community, when you go after healing in the way that we're trying to go after it, it's going to be opposed. Because Satan doesn't want that. He doesn't want you having peace. He doesn't want you having any kind of ability to overcome what comes down. So we're just kind of having a little bit of a fireside chat this morning. And so we're talking about this whole idea of next thing you know. So Sheila was married for 26 years and was divorced after 26 years of marriage. I was married for 26 years and was divorced after 26 years of marriage. And now you guys are going, well, why did you guys get remarried to each other if you divorced each other after 26 years? Well, it wasn't to each other. It was to other people. And we are both friends and love those other people. Okay? I want to say that. And only the love of God and the transformation of our hearts by His Spirit are capable of allowing that to happen. We get really odd looks all the time when, she's hugging my ex-wife, or they're talking to each other about intimate things, or they're calling each other about stuff, and enjoying that relationship, quite frankly. And so, anyway, that being said, we both have kind of that, and Sheila never had kids. She wanted kids. It was one of the things that, my son asked me, Derek asked me, so what are you guys preaching about this weekend? And I told him, and he was like, oh, that's really good. And he said, yeah, Sheila's life didn't really turn out the way she wanted it. I mean, she ended up with you. Our family is really good for humility. And, she went from being single, footloose, and fancy-free, driving a convertible Mini Cooper, to kids the day we got married, grandkids the day we got married. Mini Cooper's gone shortly thereafter. Minivan comes along. And so that's Sheila's life. And so I'm going to let her talk more about that. But I want you to think back a little bit on maybe ground zero, because it's going to happen. You're going to end up with an addiction. Your child's going to end up with an addiction. You're going to end up divorced. Your child's going to end up divorced. Or somebody gets hurt. Somebody you love dearly gets cancer. I mean, there's 1,000 different storms. It doesn't have to be because of stupid human tricks like Darren Kuhn has pulled. It can be just because life happens. And so I don't want to project any of that on you, but we could, and we talked about it probably a month ago when we started thinking about this, and a couple of weeks ago when we started getting more serious about it, and Sheila agreed to help me. I said, we could just list off everything that we've ever been through together, and that would be like reading from the phone book, and you guys would be bored stiff. I could play a really cool video of that, all that sort of thing. However, we don't need to, because you've already experienced it. You know what the disasters are in your life. You know what the storms are in your life. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And just try to figure out, how do we move forward without looking back all the time, reblaming the person, okay? In John 13:34, Jesus says, I give you a new command, right? And if you've grown up in church, you've heard this a lot, and he says, love one another as I have loved you. And so you have to stop and ask the question, what does that look like? And I have had Jesus with skin on him in the form of Sheila Kuhn for 17 years now. And that has been described by this: how has she loved me as Christ has loved me? Well, how did Christ do that? He looked at my blamable behavior. I was guilty. I had made some big mistakes. Lots of them. Numerous times. Some of them more than once. And he looked beyond that blamable behavior. And he looked to what my need was. And that need was forgiveness. That need was unconditional love. Sacrificial love. Love that hurts. And he supplied that need. So if you ever wonder, how has Jesus loved you? And what does it mean when he says, hey, I want you to love your child as I have loved you. I want you to love your parent as I have loved you. I want you to love your mate as I have loved you. That's it. Looking beyond their blamable behavior, looking to what their need is, and supplying that need. Pretty simple, really, really hard to do that sometimes, especially if you're married to me. So, anyway, so looking back on this, we've had some major hiccups. Some of those hiccups have been caused by me. Some of those hiccups have been because of the baggage that I brought into the marriage. Some of those hiccups have been, she doesn't have a lot of baggage, but she's got some. And so the baggage that Sheila brought into the marriage. And so we've had to fight through that a few times. And even in the midst of doing wonderful, loving things, and I'm going to say one more thing and I'm going to stop, and this is just an example. Several years ago, my mom was very, very ill. She was in a nursing home. She had broken her hip twice. And from the first hip break to the period we found ourselves in, she had not been out of the hospital or out of a rehab center. And Sheila, being the amazingly gifted, nurturing nurse that she is, and the daughter-in-law who loved my mom very, very well, was there every day at the nursing home. And I was trying to be there every day, and Denisha was trying to be there every day, and others were too. But Sheila was the primary caregiver. She was the one that dealt with the nurses. She was the one that dealt with the doctors. She was the one that dealt with the people at the nursing home and all of those different things. And she's the one that helped us understand how's best to love our mom, even my sisters and I. And she was doing well, but the nursing home wasn't. And I was getting pretty focused on how do I fix this broken disaster. And I was getting very angry. And while the nursing home wasn't going to sit and listen to me with my anger, guess who did? She did, whether she liked it or not. And at one point, I walked in, and she had a couple of bags, kind of like she was going to go visit somebody for some time. I don't know what was going on. And I said, what's going on? And she said, well, here's the deal. You're going to have to deal with your anger and stop taking it out on me, or I'm going to remove myself from the situation until such time as you can. And she probably said it a little more kind than that. But that was the gist of it, right? And this is in the midst of us fighting a battle together and loving my mom and all of these things. But I was such a bear that it was almost impossible for her, or anyone else for that matter, to live with me. Thankfully, She and Carson were the only ones living with me at that time. But that being said, we're going to throw in, I'm just going to kind of throw out there. So we've been through a lot of stuff. What has that looked like in your life to kind of look beyond my blamable behavior? We'll just use me as the example, because there's far more for me. And what does that look like for you? And how have you moved on? And the end result here is grace. Okay? It's grace. How does she move on with grace enough for me that it actually changes my behavior? Because Titus 2:11 says, grace has appeared to all men, and it has changed you. Okay? Grace is the thing that changes. Rules, mandated behavior, screaming, hollering, throwing fits, none of that changes behavior. None of it. Well, it might change it, but it makes it worse. Grace is the only thing that changes it for the better. So.
Okay, so what does that look like? I think first and foremost, having God at the center of our relationship. So, Darren and I aren't relying on each other for the appropriate guidance and resource to get through whatever hurdle that we're going through, because we're not enough. We're not enough individually or together. And so I think the first thing is just knowing that there was the foundation of God in our marriage and between us that we each could rely on. And then I think the second thing was understanding that I could not control Darren Coon. I don't know that anybody can. But that was a really hard lesson for me to learn, because and I say this in all truth, and every parent in the room will understand this. I thought that I could control things, and it's because I never had children. Once that happened, I realized, wow, you really can't make people do things they don't want to do. And you need to understand that as a nurse, what did I do every day? I told people what they needed to do, and guess what? They did it. So it's such a simple thing, but it was a huge thing, which was that I was not in control of him. And my resource, my primary resource for him was God. And so at some point I realized that and just got in a deeply intimate place with God and turned Darren over. I had to turn myself over too, but basically admitting that as a human I couldn't control somebody else, and then acknowledging that the best person in the world who could affect him positively was God. And I needed to step back and get out of the way so that God could work through him. I love him dearly, and I have since the first time he hooked me with a fishing hook, I guess. But it did. But God loves him better than I can ever love him. And so just stepping back and letting that happen. And in the process, identifying that there are also things in me that Darren cannot change, and that he's had to turn me over to God for that has been tremendously. The only word I could think of when I was thinking about this was freeing. It freed me up to love him well, because I no longer was his judge, his jury, his mother, his teacher, his whatever. Allowing God to father him allowed me to be his wife. And that was probably one of the key things that as we moved forward through all of the other things that we went through, that we were able to do and hopefully do well.
That freedom that she talked about is real, folks. I mean, I still remember the moment in which Sheila came into the room and she was upset about something. And she was like, probably used those exact words. And I, you know, for a minute I was like, okay, what do I do? What do I do? I got to react. I mean, what have I done wrong? Hey, isn't that the first thing that comes through your mind, guys? I mean, your wife comes in the room and you go, oh, what did I do? What, I mean, you know, it's like, ooga, you know, I mean, the horns start going off. Oh my gosh, battle stations, you know, I mean, all of that, right? And that happened, and then I thought about it for a minute, and I went, you know what? No, this is a Sheila thing. This is not a Darren thing. And this is a Sheila and God thing. And so the best thing I can do is maybe smile if the moment's right, maybe not smile if the moment's not right, but begin to pray, even if she doesn't know that I'm praying, and say, all right, God, she's hurting. I love her. I can't fix that because, A, I'm not even really, part of the source, and I'm definitely not the fixer. And so being able to do that and walk out of the room and go, wow, that's pretty freeing. I mean, it really is. And it's not, oh, I don't care about you. It's, I do care about you, but I realize there's somebody else in this room that cares even more. And between him and her, they can get this thing fixed. They can work this out. So the kind of the first thing you said was, God at the center, which means you're not. I have to realize I'm not the center of my world. My world doesn't, if you were standing around a little while earlier, you might have heard me say, hey, it's your world, Sheila, I'm just living in it. And that's true, and we kind of tease each other that way sometimes. And that's the reality is, hey, it is their world. It's not necessarily mine. And I'm definitely not the center of it. But who else is not the center of it? She's not. God is. And so when we realize, A, that we're not the center of our own world, and hopefully B comes really fast, that He is, not that other person. And again, guys, if many of you guys have spent any time with me at all, you know one of the things that I've focused on in the last 15 years of my ministry has been helping guys understand she's not your validation. She can love you well, but she can't validate you as a man. She can't validate you as a great father. She can't validate you even really as a great husband. But God can. And so if you're taking your validation to her all the time, guess what? If she has the ability to validate you, put the A on the report card for you, what else does she have the ability to do? Put the F on the report card. If she's the report card, that's a rough place. Okay? Because on any given day, I'm an F. Not an A. And we call that Tuesday at our house. But that's the reality. And it's the same for her. I can't be the report card for her. The first 26 years of my marriage to my former wife, whom I love to this day, I tried to validate her constantly. I tried to tell her how wonderful she was, how good of a mom she was, how special she was, how beautiful physically of a person, how well she loved others, all of those things. It did not matter because that wasn't what was needed. She had to be comfortable in her own skin, and the only person that could do that for her was God. And so if that can't happen by God, it's surely not going to happen by you. And so you can't take the place of God. You can't be His substitute teacher, in essence. What else?
I think one of the other experiences that have helped us get through the next thing, is seeking wisdom and praying independently of each other about situations and then coming together to share what we've heard from God so that we can feel like we understand what our next steps or paths are. That's been very helpful a lot of times, and it's amazing how that works. It does work. So if you haven't tried that lately, try that. And the other thing I think that's been really important is that we've had to understand one another. We've needed to know our stories. We've needed to know our wounds. We've needed to know the places where we've made very intimate progress with God and the places that He's still working, so that as we interact with each other, as we look to problem solve, that we're not, I don't want to say that, we're not blaming each other for things that occurred in the past or things that we know are still broken. With brokenness, we need love and grace, and blame is not going to achieve what we're hoping for. So,
so I have 4 pages of notes. She has 4 pages of notes. We're at the bottom of one. The good news is they're the same. No, I'm teasing. That was a joke, you guys. Joke. It was serious, but it was a joke. So, and we're running on 11 o'clock, and I'm not going to keep you here for another hour. However, I want to just go to Matthew chapter 5 in your Bible. And we're going to kind of stop here. Now, here's what I will say. Sheila and I are available. We are limited in our resources because we both do a lot of other things with a lot of other people, but we love nothing better than doing that with them, okay? And we are available for phone conversations. We're available for, one-on-ones and different things, and we are happy to do that. And we've done a considerable amount of couples counseling. We have been counseled as couples, and we've counseled counselors as couples. And the only reason I tell you that is not to say, hey, we've got it all figured out. We don't. We don't. But we know the person who does, and we know how to go to him. And so I want to just end with a couple of things. And anything else you want to say before I kick you off the stage?
I'm good.
Okay, good. Love you. So Matthew chapter 5 is the Beatitudes, right? And Jesus starts out and says, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are those who are persecuted. And blessed are the meek. Blessed are all of these different things, right? Well, ultimately what's happening there is Jesus is confronting kind of the four-headed monster that arises in our life. Okay? This is the first sermon he's preached publicly that we know of. And the very first thing that he attacks is this kind of four-headed monster, which is ultimately the desire. It's the I wants. Okay? I want my child to grow up and be. I want my wife to be. I want my husband to be. I'd like for my new job to be. I want my grandchildren to be. And there's nothing wrong with those wants. Absolutely nothing wrong with them. But when they become the God, that's when the four-headed monster begins to arise. And I can tell you anecdotally what that looks like. I can tell you about a young girl that I knew that was dying to graduate high school. She was in love with Jesus, had a tremendously intimate relationship with Jesus. She wanted to go to a seminary in Lubbock, Texas, and spend 9 months there and learn how to teach the gospel to people in foreign countries and learn perhaps a new language, and then go for 18 months or so onto the mission field with a bunch of other people around her age, college-age people, and do mission work for 4 or 5 years. And then figure out what life looks like after that. Mom and Dad were great people. Dad was a deacon in the church. Mom was the church secretary. Grandpa was an elder. Grandma was a great woman. And they were, hey, sweetie, that's great. We love that. That is very noble. But we don't want you to go off to the mission field. We want you to go to Oklahoma Christian University and find a guy and get married and have babies, and then we can rock the babies on our porch. But if you go off to Africa on the mission field, we won't be able to do all that. And put a guilt trip on her. And it broke her heart. So she did go to Oklahoma Christian. Within a year, she had dropped out. She was pregnant, not married. It took years to overcome that brokenness. And there's 100 other stories like that, okay? And I don't say that to say anything bad about those people. They're wonderful people. They had wonderful goals. But our goal as a family, our number one goal as a family is to glorify God. Our number one goal as a human. That's our purpose, to glorify God. But how do we do that in a family? Really quickly, we do it this way. We create an environment in our family that our children and each other can explore the glory of God in our lives. That's all we're here to do, is reflect the glory of God. But He does it differently in everyone's life. He does it differently in my life than He does in Garrett's. And He does it differently in Jeremy's life than He does in Dallas's. And if they don't allow God to reflect His glory through them in that way, it might be that no one ever will in our community. And so this is what He's looking for, and that's what He's looking for in your family as well, is for you to create a place that you can allow your child or your mate, your family, to begin to experiment and figure out what is the way in which I bear the image of God, perhaps a little differently than anybody else. And then mature that. And allow that to experiment over time. And mature it and bring it alive where it's productive in the family. And then release it onto the world so that God's glory goes with them everywhere they go. But when our wants get in the way of perhaps what God has created someone for, that's where we run into problems. And it's hard for me to even call that sinful, but it's destructive. And so, in the Beatitudes, what Jesus is really saying here is this. He's kind of, when He says, blessed are the poor in spirit, He's basically saying, and this is kind of the way I think the Hebrew mind would have heard this, blessed is the one who's not addicted to happiness. Is that a bad thing to be addicted to among all the things we could be addicted to? According to psychiatrist Gerald May, who's a phenomenal Christian and worked with terribly addicted people in the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco back in the 70s. He says every human is addicted to at least 17 things. I don't know what those 17 are in my life. She probably does. But I'm betting that that's probably really close. If you squared it or, something, cubed it, I don't know. It's there. But Jesus is saying, blessed is the one who's not addicted to happiness, because you're not going to get it every day. And so if you're okay with being unhappy sometimes, you're blessed. Because you are going to have happy days, but you're going to have unhappy days. And so, but if all of my life and my goodness and the way that I relate to people around me is based on my feeling of happiness, I'm going to be hurt and I'm going to hurt others. And then he says, blessed are the poor. Blessed are the ones who are not addicted to wealth. And kind of the four-headed monster is this idea of wealth, power, pleasure, honor. This is some things that the church fathers talked about early on in church history, that this was kind of the four-headed monster of Satan and the world and our own flesh. That the three of those things work together to kind of raise up this four-headed monster of, I want power, I want wealth, I want honor, I want pleasure, and I will have it at any cost. And so he's saying, blessed is the one who's not addicted to that. Blessed is the one who's not addicted to power. When he says, blessed are the meek, meek are not weak. Meek are powerful people, very powerful people who do not use it to hurt others, but use it to support others, to buttress others up. That's what a meek person is. And so he's saying, blessed are the meek, the ones who are not craving power, addicted to power, but have it and are capable of using it for others. And blessed are you when you're dishonored. Blessed are you if you're not addicted to honor, because you are going to be dishonored. And I got to tell you, my anger, and I definitely have some anger issues. My anger is riled faster with dishonor than anything else. When someone dishonors me, disrespects me, or dishonors or disrespects someone that I love, or something that I care about, that's when my throttle goes from 0 to 100 in a heartbeat. And so Jesus is saying, Darren, don't be addicted to that honor, because it's not always going to be there. You'll be blessed if you're okay with being dishonored. Now, yeah, we want to teach our children to honor us. We want to teach our children to honor others and all those things. I'm not preaching against any of those things. None of these things are bad in and of themselves. But when they become the focus of our life, they are destructive, at the very least, and probably sinful. So, you might be asking, well, how in the world do I respond to a message like this? Well, I will say this. Garrett will be in the back, and he would offer to pray with anybody. Sheila and I will be in the back as well, and we're happy to pray with anybody. But, if you just want to reach out to us in private or in public, doesn't matter, and chat about some of this stuff, we're happy to do it. We can share some books that we've read together. We can share some studies that we've done together, the way we pray together at times and pray separately at times. And we're happy to do that. That's what, honestly, that's what community is, folks. It's other, we're all walking. Some of us are a little further along the road than others. There are people here. Dan and Vernon should be the ones up here giving the talk, right? They got some wisdom about them and some years on them. But she said no, she wouldn't do it with Dan, and so he asked me to do it anyway, and so I'm here. But this is community, walking together and saying, look, I don't have it all figured out, and just trying to be as authentic as we can be without also just going, hey, life sucks, and then you die. Right? How many of you have said it, much less heard it? But it doesn't. Yes, life sucks some days. You probably never heard a preacher say that. It does some days. Blessed is the one who's not addicted to everything going right all the time, because it's not. And if we don't lose our minds over that and can walk with others in community past that, we have a wonderful place in the kingdom of God. And if we can share that with the community that we live in, that's great. And so that's the way I would ask you to respond to that. And so I'm going to pray, and the band's going to come up and finish our worship together.